My name is Jason Brown. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tally. And for those of you who do not know, Tally is the first automated debt manager. What that means is Tally figures out the smartest and the fastest way to pay down your debt and then actually takes action for you. It does all the hard work. So think of it as autopilot for your credit cards. Now, my co-founder and I, just under 4 years ago, were staring at this big number. Credit card debt is one of the widest financial challenges faced by Americans, with just under half of all households having about $15,000 in credit card debt. And this means that Americans are leaving over $100 billion on the table every single year with unnecessarily high APRs and fees. So when you think of most finance apps, you usually think of charts and graphs and data, potentially ads, recommendations on products you should get. We took an entirely different approach. This is a picture of our home screen. It's a picture, for those who can't see it in the back, it's somebody with their feet on the table drinking a cup of coffee. Now, our view is that in the future, you will have a completely invisible and ambient service that will mediate your entire financial life on your behalf. So that's our view. And we took the step back to say, how do we eventually build that? Like, where do we start? So we decided to start with credit card debt because it's one of the widest, most spread, hard financial problems to solve for Americans. And on that foundation, we would then automate the rest of it. So how do you get to an app that has a picture of a screen with somebody with their feet on the table? We thought it would take us a year. It took us 3. We raised $42 million, and it ended up being way harder than we thought. And the reason being is if you want to deliver full automation, that last 20% is a killer. And to get to full automation, we ended up having to start from scratch, and we ended up building an entire bank core from the ledger up using Scala microservices. So we decided that we needed to have the full ability to algorithmically underwrite customers, algorithmically transmit money, algorithmically lend money. We needed to be a money lender. We needed to be able to transmit money. We had to do all the financial work to give an experience to a consumer that was effectively work-free. And our view is even getting customers to click buttons, to fill out forms, that's a tall order, and that causes people not to get the benefits of products. So you have to engineer around all of that so that customers can just sit back and let you do the work for them. Now, what's unique about Tally is that it really separates the burden of credit card debt from the benefit. So you get to still use your cards. So you're swiping your card, you're getting the points, the rewards, you get into the lounge at the airport. Nothing changes in how you pay. But Tally then is sweeping over your balances a couple times a week if you're getting charged interest. And we're moving those balances over to our ledger, okay? And we're charging you interest, but it's a substantially lower rate than what the banks are charging you. We're also guaranteeing you don't have to worry about late fees anymore. So only 16% of Americans use auto pay for credit cards, okay? 16% of Americans use auto pay for credit cards. They use autopay for a lot of other things like student loans or rent because it's a fixed payment every single month. But with credit cards, it varies, so people, they're scared that it's going to lead to overdraft. And all of that manual payment means the average American is paying 48 payments per year manually. And they're paying $12 billion a year in late fees. So if you're in the top maybe 10% of earners, you just put everything on auto pay, no problem. But for the rest of Americans, they really are concerned about overdraft. Tally takes that responsibility and is now in a fiduciary position where we are paying your cards for you every single month at the right time. But the biggest advantage of Tally is that we are using algorithms to manage your debt and to get you out of debt faster. Because the number one thing somebody with credit card debt needs to do is to be out of credit card debt. And so we built something in Tally called Tally Advisor. And it's like a robo-advisor for debt. We take into account your income, your spending, your total debt, and we help you come up with a date for when you're going to be debt-free. So you set that date. It's a realistic date that's based on your actual data. And then it's cheerleading you along the way as you have setbacks, the good things in your life happen, the bad things, and it's helping you get out of debt faster. So on average, we're seeing people on track to get out of debt 10 to 15 years faster than they would otherwise, which is really exciting. So the big eye-opener for us was when we realized and we learned that it's not about money. So my co-founder and I are both finance dorks. We're like, Tally is all about saving you money, getting you out of debt faster. we ended up doing a study 2 years ago, or a year ago, I believe, and we used a tool called the State Trade Anxiety Index. Now, it's this tool that's been used by academics for multiple decades, and it measures how much anxiety you have in a given situation, okay? And we administered that to people with credit card debt. And we found that people with good credit, 2/3 of them have moderate to severe levels of anxiety when they're dealing with their debt. And just over half of all people with excellent credit, so excellent credit, people with 720 FICOs and above, okay? Now, let's stop here for a second on anxiety. So we thought the primary emotion people would have with credit card debt was sadness or regret, like feeling like something was lost in the past that you feel bad about. But anxiety is actually a fear emotion. It's the sense that there's an unknown threat in the future or out there somewhere that you don't have the tools to counteract and protect yourself. And it's a fear feeling that you do not have the tools necessary to change your outcome. And the fact that this many Americans are living with medical levels of anxiety, so similar to what you might feel sitting in a doctor's office waiting for test results, really spoke to us. And we realized that the true power of automation is actually giving people emotional release and benefit, and as a secondary, helping people financially. And for me, this really spoke to kind of my upbringing. So I was raised by amazing parents. I was actually homeschooled. They loved me a lot. I had a lot of attention and all those things. But money was just never something my parents were very good at. And we just always had anxiety around money in our household. And is an example of like how innovative my parents were. Like when I was younger, we didn't have enough money for presents for the holidays. And so my dad, literally, he was in law school, and he went into a dumpster and found like discarded wood and some furniture, and he got it out and he refinished it on the nights like after he got done studying, and he gave us presents. And so we had presents. We didn't know any better, but like he like had put his sweat and tears into those presents to give them to us. So it wasn't like we were lacking, but like as I was growing older and older, I just saw how much that weighed on my parents. Even as we supposedly should have been better off financially, it just seemed like my parents always made the wrong financial decisions. And that anxiety, even though I'm fortunate to not have those same challenges, it sticks with you. And so this really helped us focus our mission on helping people be less stressed first and better off financially second through automation. And so let's talk about what's next, where consumer fintech is going. And I think there's a lot of young faces here. So for those of you that are too young to imagine the pre-financial crisis world, it was a world where people had relatively few relationships with financial institutions. So you would have your checking account, your savings account with the same bank, and oftentimes your auto loan or your home loan. But people had relatively few relationships. The financial crisis hits, and it just fundamentally rocked consumers' faith in the way they viewed the financial industry. It also meant that these big banks were pulling back, and they were having to focus all their efforts on digging out of this massive mess they were in. And it opened up this door for what many people call the unbundling of the bank, taking all these individual things that one bank does and try to take one or two of those and do it in a better way. And that worked great for a while, but I'm fundamentally pessimistic about this because the banks are catching up. At the end of the day, banks have a huge advantage that we don't. Actually, they have two. So first, they have immense scale. Their ability to access capital at very low cost is something that us fintechs can't even dream about. The second is that they have distribution. And distribution is really important, is that the ability to push your products out to millions of users for relatively low cost. And so what banks can do is they can sit back and they can be 5 years or even 8 years behind where fintech is, and they just cherry pick the best ideas and do it 70% as good, and then it's just good enough. And because the core banking account is so sticky, they end up retaining those customers. And it's interesting that there's also not a lot of acquisitions for any meaningful amounts of money in finance. Because the banks are like, screw you, we'll just copy what you do, and we'll be 70% as good, and we'll keep our customers. And like Clarity Money got bought by Goldman Sachs it was a modest acquisition, and now Goldman Sachs via Marcus is providing the app on the right, and then Erica, which is a chatbot through Bank of America. So I want to ask you to say, how do we then compete? How does fintech compete? And I believe when it comes to consumer finance, it's just one answer, and it's automation or bust. What banks struggle with is creating automation across multiple accounts in financial institutions. All right? They're going to be great at taking whatever UI and whatever cool way of interacting with the customer, your chatbot. They're going to copy that, no problem. But what banks are going to struggle with is creating a fully automated layer across all your financial accounts and experiences. And this is not a complete list, but there's a whole bunch of great companies doing interesting things around saving and investing. We decided to use our insertion point on the debt side, and we have our reasons why we think that was the right place to start. But regardless, I believe everybody is chasing to this same point of providing a fully automated experience across your entire financial life so that you, the fintech, can own the relationship with the customer. And the number one things that banks do not want to have happen is to have the fintech own this relationship and turn them into pipes. They don't want to be a utility. Because if they are a utility, then that means that all the excess rents that they're earning through all their products get compressed, and most of those get returned to the customer, and they lose the ownership of the customer. And so they will fight and do anything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. Meanwhile, fintech is working to try to create that automation. So here's the thought experiment, okay? What if you could port your bank account? Okay? What if there was one button that either you push or your automated service pushes, and it could move your entire bank account, port it from here to here, overnight, and all of your auto debits and credits and everything went with it? What would happen? Well, it's interesting because those of us that are old enough to remember, there was a time before 2000 that if you wanted to switch from Sprint to Verizon, you had to give up your cell phone number. Anybody remember that? A couple people. So if you can believe it, in this insane dark ages, it was if you wanted to switch providers, you had to give up your phone number. And any economist will tell you if there's friction in switching providers from any service to another, it always benefits the incumbents. It allows the incumbents to charge excess rents that would otherwise not be there. So the government came in and said, hey, that's not fair. We are going to mandate that carriers allow customers to switch their numbers and take their number with them when they switch providers. Okay? What's interesting is immediately, so this graph right here shows savings. So there was a study that was done out of Berkeley, and this was right after 2000. So they looked at what was the average price of a plan before porting and what was it after. And what was interesting is as long as you used over about 1,000 minutes a month, I'm sure people here don't even know what a minute is, but back in the day, you got charged for every minute you talked on the phone, kind of like some plans used to charge for like megabytes or gigabytes of data, but you used to have to pick your plan. Because if you went over your minutes, if you're really young, mom was really pissed. And if you were older, you would get charged like 50 cents a minute or something crazy. So you'd have to pick your plan. And you'd pick the 1,000-minute plan or whatever. So for people who were using 1,000 minutes or more, they immediately saw 5 to 10% savings on their monthly bill. That was immediately after porting. And then we saw as the decade went on, there got more and more competition for customers. And now the carriers had to work harder and harder to retain you. So they had to give you more value by giving you better service and or charging you less. So what is very bad for our incumbents is when you reduce friction. And what's interesting about automation is if you can completely reduce all friction to zero, so meaning there's no cognitive load on the customer, there's no time involved for the customer to do it, and there's no actual cost of having your account move from here to here, or moving your mortgage from A to B, or moving your 401k from here to here, then suddenly all of those excess rents that banks are earning right now get compressed to close to zero, and that goes to the customer. So my theory is that automation equals inclusion. And what's interesting is that some people in our society already have 100% automation. The ultra wealthy. The ultra-wealthy can hire people to do all their financial work for them. So they can have accountants and tax loophole specialists and financial people who are grinding it out in some office park somewhere while they are in Aspen skiing, okay? And that unit of automation in that office park, they're figuring out all the things, they're doing all the work, they're filing everything, and the person in Aspen might get a phone call. But that phone call isn't like, hey, should we file the Form 429A, or do you think the Form 5220 is better? No. It's like, yo, you have 2 yachts. Do you still want both of those? Do you want to sell a yacht? What do you want to do? All the interaction is at a human level of I have these human objectives, and then the people in the office park make it so. And if we collectively can build automated services that can democratize that so that every normal person can have effectively what ultra-wealthy people have now, we'll be living in the future. And I believe firmly that the future will be invisible and it'll be ambient. It will be so present that we won't even know that it exists. And we will have a world where all of your financial decisions and financial work is done invisibly, and you might not even know what the term 409A or 401K or 409A or 529, like all these tax terms, it'll just be like, oh yeah, I have a kid who's gonna go to college and they're gonna have money to go to college, right? It'll just be all at a human layer. And so I wanna end with this story that I'm obsessed with, which maybe you'll think is lame. So there's this big book of stats. It's called The Rise and Fall of American Growth from 1800 to 2000. It's like 500 pages, and it's decade by decade statistics on what life looked like. It's like how many like grams of hot dogs they ate in 1810 to 1820. Very riveting. But there was one section that grabbed my attention, which was before the electric washer machine, the average household invested about 500 hours a year in washing clothes and linens. 500 hours a year. Then the electric washer machine comes along. It's this box of automation. You put in dirty clothes, out come clean clothes, and that dropped from about 10 hours a week to 1 to 2 hours a week. And what's interesting about being human is that there are certain things, certain kinds of things we can do that enhance the human experience, like spending time with your family, thinking, studying, enhancing your career. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do, but like washing clothes like this is not one of them. And suddenly this functional load that we had was completely taken off of us. And regular people had what rich people already had, which they had people that they paid to do that for them. But now it was available at a low cost to everybody. The next 20 years is going to be defined by taking cognitive load off of people's plate, so to speak, and doing it all for them. And we will be giving people back time, but I think what's more important is we will be giving people back a positive emotional state. That will be kind of conceptually taking this anxiety that's on their shoulders and putting it on the shoulders of machines. And suddenly, you know, they won't know any better because that's just the way it'll always have been. But we will be taking burden off of people's lives and erasing that from the human experience, which I find really exciting. And that's what is driving us forward. So, thank you so much.